After joining the police force, Deputy Josh Walters was warned away from buying a motorcycle by his wife, who joked that he was only allowed one life-threatening interest at a time. The dangerous responsibilities of law enforcement are well known and often covered on the news, whether it's a high-speed car chase or a physical altercation. Usually, if there's no blood or broken bones, officers are considered healthy and go right back to work. But it's the internal damage from head trauma that too often goes unnoticed.
When we're involved in an incident, whether it be a car crash, whether it be somebody punching me in the face, smacking my head on the ground, all these different scenarios, you got to remember a concussion. It does not have to be an impact. You don't have to actually hit your head on something and get a concussion. In a very generic way of saying it, it's my brain smashing into my skull. So you can get concussions in a lot of ways, but it's not something that's ever been looked at or checked on. When I'm involved in something, the first thing we check is for holes. And make sure I'm not stabbed, shot, all these things. If there's no blood, then a lot of times we forget to look at all the other things that in between the ears aspect.
Walters says that while we've made incredible strides for recognizing and healing traumatic brain injuries in other areas such as athletics, it's continued to be overlooked in law enforcement.
When you look at a Pee-wee soccer coach, football coach, they have more training than we do on concussions. They have to go through more protocols on concussions than we do. It's kind of crazy to think that us as a profession that have such a variety of incidents, there's more training for 6-year-olds playing soccer than there is for us.
In an effort to bring the same attention to law enforcement, Dr. Jacqueline Cassis led a concussion study that was recently published in the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation. Cassis is an assistant professor in the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at The Ohio State University. Her team surveyed about 400 law enforcement officers in central Ohio to get a sense of how common head injuries are in this line of work.
Our findings suggested that 74% of law enforcement officers reported a history of one or more prior TBIs, and 30% sustained one or more while working on the job.
Surprisingly, not all head injuries come from a physical impact. The blast pressure from explosions or gunshots can cause immediate damage and even bigger problems down the line if the injury's left untreated.
Things like headache, dizziness, nausea, fogginess. It also causes those mood-related symptoms. So depression, anxiety, feeling more emotional. And I think it's important to point out that in many of the cases in the head injuries that the law enforcement officers reported in our study, they went unreported, undiagnosed, untreated. And so when you have a head injury or a concussion and you don't treat them acutely, then a lot of times we see some long-term complications, long-term outcomes.
Such as symptoms of depression and PTSD, which is what Cassis's research focuses on. The surveys show that these symptoms were much more common in officers who had reported having previous head injuries. Not only can these injuries impact mental health, but they can get in the way of the officer's daily duties. Of the people who've gotten a concussion while working, Cassis says that 57% reported that it limited their ability to do their job.
Some of the more common symptoms are things like sensitivity to light and sensitivity to noise. And so now you're driving in the dark at night with lights and sirens on. That could provoke symptoms. Oftentimes they're tasked with writing reports about what happened. And following concussion, sometimes people feel foggy or have difficulty concentrating, which could make that more challenging.
Concussions can also affect a person's reaction time, which is a crucial component of law enforcement. Thankfully, this report provides a solid foundation for the next step, which is to create a standard concussion protocol. While the structure that athletes follow is a good rubric, the nature of an officer's job won't always allow for the ideal healing process. So the challenge is figuring out a flexible plan that still keeps everyone safe.
So when we think about return to duty protocols, we think about what athletes do in their return to play protocol or the military does for their return to duty protocol, which is essentially as soon as you can following the injury, remove the officer from duty. Now, of course, unlike, your high school sports athlete who sustains a concussion while playing football, we can't always take them out at the moment that they sustain an injury.
It doesn't really work like that. They get to go off the sidelines. They get to go through the protocol. I still have a suspect. I still have paperwork I have to do. I still have to write a report. All these different processes still have to take place.
Which means that law enforcement has to define what their sidelines look like. If it can't be stopping work completely, then what's the next best option?
And I think that's where it really starts for us, is that first initial, how do we set up a process? Because we work in the gray area. Every use of force isn't going to be a concussion protocol. Every car crash isn't necessarily going to be, probably should be. Every time I fall, when you fall in gear, it is not a athletic, cute thing to do. It is clumsy, awkward, and painful. So every time I fall down in my gear, somebody's not running over to check me for a concussion. But we have to have some education and some evaluation of that.
It's important to note that the officer won't be out of duty for long. Concussion research is continuously evolving, and the days of sitting in isolation for weeks are gone. Modern healing takes a more active approach, meaning that the officer will be able to be back in action sooner rather than later.
Our recommendations have changed. So for a long time, it was like sit in a dark room, wait till your symptoms resolve. And we've made a lot of progress in our understanding of how to properly manage concussions. And we actually find that rest is not best. We actually want people to get back to light aerobic exercise that doesn't exacerbate symptoms as soon as possible following injury. And then gradually increase from there, gradually increase both their physical and cognitive activities in the days or weeks following their injury, and then ultimately undergo a return to duty screening by a medical provider.
Many states have this screening as a requirement for athletes, so it's just a matter of shifting the rubric a bit to fit the different needs of an officer versus an athlete. A foundational part of this process is both self and peer assessment, which requires education on the signs and symptoms to watch out for. In an ideal world, CACIS would love it if every department had a healthcare professional on site so that the evaluation and care can happen immediately. And though this would take an immense amount of resources, Walter says it's not out of the realm of possibility.
We see some of these larger places that are being able to bring in ATs and CTs that can be a little more on staff, so to speak. And luckily, through our collaboration with OSU, we've been able to bring in some people on a kind of a part-time deal. They do so many hours with us where we have an ability to go down and see a specialist with something instead of having to go through a very lengthy process of trying to go through all of our different steps to get to a doctor, to an evaluation, where a lot of officers just give up and they go back to work and they grind it out. And then it ends up being a long-term injury in some aspect.
But even if departments are able to remove all of the healthcare hurdles, there's still the issue of officers not reporting their injuries, whether it's out of not wanting to miss work or thinking that reporting will be construed as being overdramatic. This is a blind spot for many institutions' concussion protocol.
We see the same thing in the sports world. There are a lot of concussions in sports that go unreported because sometimes people don't know. Sometimes they don't want to report because they don't want to be removed from play. In this case, the officers maybe don't want to be removed from duty, which could be because they feel like they're letting their team down, their organization down, their agency down, or because they think it's not serious enough to need treatment.
Plus, a lot of guys my age and older than me, we come from a very different idea. When we look where concussions became a priority within sports, it really hasn't been that long. A lot of the people after me are a little more cognizant of it because they came through some of the sports where it was taught that this is a concussion. You're not going to go back on the field. Where my generation was, as long as you can pick one of the three fingers in front of you, you go back in. No matter how loud the ringing in your ears are, you're back in and you're playing again. And a lot of guys older than me, it was even worse than that. So a lot of it is just education in that aspect of looking at it as a real injury because it has very long-term effects.
Effects that don't just impact the injured person. Creating a universal concussion protocol for law enforcement isn't the end goal. It's one part of a larger plan to increase the overall wellness of officers. Walters believes that addressing the prevalent issues in this line of work, like sleep and mental health, will have a positive ripple effect through the department, community, and families of the officers.
We're trying to look at all these different principles of how to create a better officer for on the street or in the jail or in the courtroom, but also for home and for family. Because the more that we can have a healthy, more well-balanced officer, the better the officer is for the community, for their family, for their office. My family didn't choose this job, I chose it. They shouldn't have to punished for my choice to choose this career.
You can find more information about Deputy Josh Walters, Dr. Jacqueline Cassis, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.